Happy politics and welcome to another. He got me. He got me. He got me. If for those of you listening on Spotify or iTunes or whatever, you have no idea what I'm talking about. My co-host, who I will introduce shortly, is holding up a sacred object. It is a Denver Broncos helmet, soon to be worn by none other than Danger Russ Wilson, formerly of the Seattle Seahawks, and we'll talk about that. Because there is a very direct for you tie-in, but we'll get to that. So, non-football fans, you can once again wait till the end of the episode to skip out. Where was I in the introduction? This is BC Poly Hot Stove. Yes, happy politics. I'm Maclean K. He's Jordan Bateman. Did I miss anything? I don't think so.
No, I just enjoyed seeing your giggly reaction there to seeing the Bronco helmet. That's good. That's good.
Dare say you did that on purpose.
Me? No. Come on. No. Would I rush an Amazon purchase for our gala? I had to make sure it was here in time to tape Hot Stove. I would never do that, Maclean.
Absolutely, you would. And I'm glad you did, and we'll get to that. But there's enough to talk about this week that's actually BC politics news. Let's start with a chasm. Anytime I get to pronounce the word chasm, I'm happy. Vaughn Palmer's piece this morning in the Vancouver Sun describes chasm between the provincial government and the BCGEU, which is the largest union of government employees in terms of contract talks. This isn't really a surprise for those of us who've been watching it closely, Jordan, but it also means that there's a real risk that contract is not going to be signed on time.
You are correct. You didn't have to be Nostradamus to see this one coming. That the BCGEU, and just picking on BCGEU first because they happen to be the one that Vaughn reported on, although this will go across the provincial government employee sector, whether it's teachers, doctors, nurses, everyone is going to be in the same boat. But it should come as no surprise that the public sector unions, who have an inordinate amount of influence, I think is a polite way of putting it, with the current NDP government, would expect giant raises, especially given the environment of inflation in which we live and the fact that, Maclean, I don't know if you heard, but there was 16 years of BC Liberal rule under which unions starved to death and people could barely scrape by. That is their interpretation, of course. However, now you have an NDP government and the BCGEU wants to get paid like Aaron Rodgers. But there's only one problem. For every 1% increase you give the public sector in wages, that's $350 million a year. That compounds because usually you don't just give them one raise, you usually give them two or three over 2 or 3 years. So very interesting to see the NDP and BCGEU far apart, as one person described those talks today.
Yes, well, as once again, a chasm. In years past, and I'm going to overgeneralize here, a lot of the public sector unions had agreed to a 2%, 2% pay raise schedule. Basically, you sign an agreement for 3 years, and in each year you get a 2% raise. It's actually, if you're used to the private sector, it's a pretty sweet deal. What's complicating it this year are two things. First of all, the rate of inflation and affordability crisis hits us all, and the public sector is wanting to keep their salaries, tie it to it. And yeah, I'm stumbling over my words. They want more money, Jordan. I'm trying to say that with too many words. And the minimum wage was just indexed to inflation, so they're pointing to that. And the other thing is not all, some of the public sector unions did yeoman's work during the pandemic, and I'm looking at the nurses and the healthcare sector, and will of course be asking for a pretty significant pay raise in the wake of that. I'm not sure how much of that applies to the BCGEU, but they're going to make that case.
Yeah, well, you think about for years, governments of both stripes have been pretty successful at negotiating these groups in blocks. Yeah. And sort of giving them the same. And there might be a little sweetener here or there for a particular union if they can justify it. But thanks to the use of Me Too clauses, the first union to settle is guaranteed to get whatever the last union settles gets as well. So there's no kind of one-upping each other. The problem, though, is with that, you're exactly right. It falls down when it comes right now to nurses, and I would say paramedics, who are desperately, I think all of us would agree, desperately underpaid, understaffed, and underappreciated by this government. Those folks deserve more. And the problem is you've got communications bureaucrats in the Premier's office who maybe don't deserve as much more as the fine nurses and paramedics. This is where this will now begin to unravel just a little bit. So the question will be, how committed are the NDP to cost controls? Is the fact that they project deficit budgets going forward just, they just plan to sign whatever deal in order to keep peace? There's the term. We haven't talked about term. The unions apparently want 2 years because that would put them right into an election year where they have the maximum amount of leverage against a Labour government starved for their votes. But government, of course, wants 3 years to punt it past that election. Not that John Horgan's ever obeyed election date rules anyways, but that's another story. So lots of stuff there. I was going to make a joke. I have Barbarians in the Garden City here, and I understand that it's a cool thing for people on podcasts with you to read from it. I could pull it out and read you the chapters on sweetheart labor agreements, but trust me, just get Mark Milkey's book, and it's at a fine used bookstore near you.
I had a little flashback there, and yes, that was a conversation that happened after taping. Look, you're absolutely right. There is an appetite in the unions for a pay raise, which is that's normal. Most of the time when your contract's up, you want a pay hike. This is not an unsurprising thing. Boy, I am butchering the English language today, Jordan. I don't know what it is. Not enough coffee. This is not a surprising thing. But you're right. Every time the salaries go up, it's a bigger dent in the budget. And though there is money set aside for this, not nominally, but it's very coyly set aside as a contingency. I think it's something like $13 billion, and a lot of that is going to go to public sector pay hikes. They can't. $13 billion sounds like a lot of money, but it actually isn't when it's spread across. We're talking about the BCGEU. You mentioned the paramedics, nurses, teachers' contracts will come up soon-ish. That money will dissipate very quickly.
Yeah, it's also over 3 years, the $13 billion. So it's not like $13 billion a year, but
exactly.
Back the envelope math here, $350 million for 1%. Let's give them each 5%. That's probably what they're asking for, given inflation is roughly 5%, right? That's a lot of money. So it's about $1.5 billion right there for the first year. Then you add again and again. So it's a tough one for the NDP because this is their core. It's difficult to overstate how important the public sector unions are to the NDP apparatus, to what's going on internally. In the middle of this, in the middle of this deal, you could have a leadership race, and you can bet that public sector workers, if they're not happy, will make their voices very loud and very known. So yeah, they really control a lot of this, and I think we've all been kind of waiting to hear what this is going to happen. Now, the other problem is, okay, it's that, we've talked about this so many times on the show, it's that cycle of inflation, right? If we try to do something to make life more affordable or better, but it costs more money, so then there's inflation, and it kind of goes around and around and around. This, of course, will prompt tax increases or cuts in public spending somewhere else, which will then fuel inflation again, or the cost of living goes up, affordability goes out the window again. And it's this constant cycle that the average taxpayer is feeling squeezed by right now.
Yeah, and the BCGEU is not nurses and not paramedics in that should the worst happen and they decide to go on strike, the public sympathy will not be rallied to the same degree as they would be for the nurses and paramedics, which is not a comment on the BCGEU. It's a comment on nurses and paramedics. And so it's one of those things. I mean, obviously no one wants that to happen, but the nurses going on strike after what just happened would be an unmitigated disaster.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. Like, you've got to do everything you can. First of all, nurses have been worked so hard and so much overtime in these past 2 years. Like, there are people leaving the profession. Like, you just got to find a way to keep as many of them in the boat as possible, or the healthcare system is going to be in a lot of trouble for a long time. So you're right. The reason why the BCGEU, usually they're one of the first because they're usually one of the more favorable towards the NDP, the one of the more willing to work out a reasonable deal with the NDP. They're not the militant teachers union, BC Teachers Federation. And I use militant as a way to describe how they describe themselves. They consider themselves one of the most militant unions in Canada. It's not that. This is a union that generally finds ways to make deals. And if they have this chasm between them, that tells you a lot about where things are at.
Once again, chasm. It's a fun word to say, and apparently describes the situation. We mentioned briefly, Jordan, yesterday, Labour Minister Harry Bains announced the minimum wage is going up I believe it's June 1st, to $15 and change an hour. It's a 40-cent raise, but probably more significant was they will be tying it to inflation from now on, which, as you know, some business owners are a little concerned. They're already stretched pretty thin. I know there will be some eye rolling whenever you mention businesses feeling the pain among a certain segment of the audience. But look, the money has to come from somewhere.
No, absolutely, and it'll come through reduced hours and things like that, or higher margins, which then again drives inflation, which then hurts affordability and all those things. I think the minimum wage is going up to $15.65.
Yes.
Both my daughters would be working for minimum wage, so you kind of go, wow, like when did I earn $16 an hour? Like I think I was probably into my first newspaper reporting job a couple of years before I earned $16 an hour. Minimum wage when I started was $4.50 an hour. You'd work a good 4 hours at the IHOP clearing tables, and you'd walk out with less than $20. Those were the days. But $20 you could spend some places, Maclean, and I would walk uphill both ways to do so. It's one of those, back at the Taxpayers Federation, we'd get asked about minimum wage sometimes, and we'd sort of punt on it. It wasn't really a taxpayer issue because there isn't a single government employee anywhere making minimum wage that we could find. As it goes up and up, $15.65, you're getting closer to more and more people who are making that kind of that wage. It's hard. Like I feel for these small businesses. A lot of small business owners would kill to make $15.65 an hour right now. They're the ones who are making far less because they're reinvesting in their business, trying to keep it afloat, trying to keep people employed. There's got to be some kind of, even if you agree with minimum wage hikes, there's got to be some sort of empathy for small business owners and what they've been through in the past 2 years, and the fact that many of them have been driven out of their businesses and may or may not ever come back.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it's the minimum wage going up, but it's also probably more significantly property taxes going up. Mm-hmm. It's clientele going down because of the pandemic and other issues like that. It's when you start to pinch too hard at both ends, eventually things burst. And I'm not suggesting that this minimum wage increase is going to do that. It probably isn't. And you're right. It's hard to begrudge somebody making minimum wage an extra 40 cents an hour. I would never do that. It's just that when people picture business in their head, they usually picture, Chip Wilson. They're not picturing, the Russian immigrants who run the laundromat where I get my dry cleaning done. This is a real example, by the way. They're not picturing the right kind of people in terms of who actually employs people in this province. And that's whom will have the most trouble with not just minimum wage hike, but property taxes and all these things going up. Yeah,
you're exactly right. And we need to remember in the restaurant business, for example, there's a lot of tips that are made as well on top of that. And I don't know about you, Maclean. It used to be like you tip 10% on baseline and then 15 if they were good. Now it seems like 20% baseline and 25 or 30 if they're good. So that's gone up as well, which is an extra cost for people. This is one of these tricky issues in government where there's an old saying about taxation. I forget who said it, but essentially it was like the art of taxation is plucking the goose of its feathers with the least amount of hissing possible. You kind of feel like this with this issue, right? Like trying to get the wage to a point which is good for the people who are on it, but at the same time not bankrupting the small business owners who are by and large paying it. So it's a delicate balance, and I looked with interest on the Canadian Federation of Independent Business comments on it. They weren't setting their hair on fire and pretending that 20,000 businesses were going to go under tomorrow, but they were saying, like, listen, this is a time where costs are increasing all over the place. Now you're increasing labor costs as well. How are we supposed to cope with all this? And they make good points. The other thing I have is tying it to inflation sounds great in theory, but what happens if we enter a year or two of deflation? Like, will we actually see the minimum wage fall? I doubt it. I can't imagine, it would be reduced.
No. I mean, it would be something that only the NDP could get away with, I think, which is just a comment. I mean, the world would end if Premier Kevin Falcon reduced the minimum wage. But yes, I just can't imagine that happening.
Yeah, no, I can't either. So I'll be curious how the legislation is written. I think Harry Baines has promised that this session or the fall. So we'll have to see how it's written and going forward. We should also talk about Rob's piece on the weekend about John Horgan's personal popularity.
Yes, I mean it's
because this ties into this.
Yeah, he at his appearance on Friday, he was asked about the trucker protests, and he gave a sort of classic Horgan answer, which was, get a life, essentially. Goodness me, why don't these people have a hobby, that kind of thing. And it wasn't so much what he said as the reaction to it. I mean, it went around the horn. It's nationally. I saw, the Boston Globe retweeting it out, Hockey Night in Canada personalities, you name it. I mean, it just had massive reach. It literally did catch fire. And Rob sort of took it as this is why the NDP have hitched their wagon to him, is that, he's got this folksy premier dad thing working for him. And it obviously works because his personal popularity has remained fairly constant over the last few years, when even the party he leads, you can't say the same thing.
Yeah, look, I think it's a gross overrating by the press gallery to pretend that this went anywhere. I didn't actually see it until I heard about it until I read about New York. So,
I hadn't either, to be honest, but I did look at the reactions afterwards. I mean, they were there, but I didn't see it either.
Yeah.
I don't follow the Boston Globe on Twitter, as one example.
I question Premier Horgan's authenticity on this issue. This is a man who has allowed many a protest and walked in many a protest and marched in many a protest on issues that were well settled, on issues that the public clearly supported. But, on this one, he decides to pipe up with one of his charming one-liners. Okay, I guess, sure. But, at the same time, you start to set an expectation about other protests that come forward from here on in.
I mean, I would argue that, your right point about Horgan and protests is well taken and accurate. But I would suggest that he has probably hardened on protests in general ever since they came to his house. And when the legislature itself was barricaded. I mean, he was not friendly to those things. And everything is more complicated when you're the one being protested.
I just don't hear him quipping the same thing about Extinction Rebellion or quipping away when it comes to Fairy Creek or things like that. You might take a stand against it. You might disagree, but he never demeans them like
That's true. He's
demeaned this group of British Columbians. And look, they're British Columbians. You can agree or disagree with them. I disagree with them. But demeaning, I don't think we should celebrate demeaning from the Premier of British Columbia. I don't buy it. Look, governments are popular until they're not.
That's
John
true.
Horgan is not as popular as he was a year ago. He wasn't not as popular as he was 2 years ago. It's like a dimmer switch. He does more and more things, and finally, frankly, there's more attention put on things that his government does outside of the little COVID bubble that a lot of folks have been dwelling in. I think that you'll see that begin to diminish. Like, it's the law of politics, right? Yeah. No one stays popular forever. No one's unbeatable forever. Gordon Campbell had 77 seats in 2001. It was all downhill from there. Like, it just, I don't know. I just find it amusing. He likes Star Trek and he's premier dad and he's woke and or lit.
Yes.
I find that a little bit because I've watched Question Period in the House. I know the press gallery has. I watched Question Period in the House and I've seen moments where the flicker of anger has flashed, and that's not premier dad.
Course.
That's premier. That's premier. 1800s dad. Let's go behind the barn with a switch and.
1800s dad.
Sorry, I watched Outlander last night. But it's that's not. I don't know. I find it amusing.
Here's my take on the NDP is that they know that a lot of the key factors of life in BC are, they're just indisputably getting worse. Mm-hmm. The overdose crisis, affordability, the cost of homes. There's a number of things like that are just demonstrably worse than they were 5 years ago now. And yes, the polls suggest that Horgan is still personally very popular, but we'll talk about this at length another time, but there's a lot of talk behind the scenes that he's already contested his last election. Mm-hmm. And so, if David Eby or Selena Robinson or Ravi Kalon is the one defending that record in a few years, it's going to look a little worse. record numbers of people are dying every single day, and eventually that's going to catch up with any government.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. So yeah, there's a disconnect there. That'll narrow. Look, also, the premier has had a very public fight with cancer.
Yes.
Cancer survivor now twice, like pretty amazing. So, I just don't think a lot of people are willing to, besmirch a guy who's still, clearly recovering from what must have been hellacious radiation treatments.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I just found it sort of amusing that, there's still this little narrative, bubbling out there. And again, like I said, the, get a hobby thing, I did not see. It did not cross my radar until Rob wrote about it. So
I also think that I wish more politicians would read the tea leaves a little sooner and leave while they're still on top. I mean, and on top, I don't mean popular or good, but, still being able to call their own shots and leave on their own terms. I look at somebody like Justin Trudeau and think, when it turns on you, it will turn hard. And maybe it would be better not to be there for that. Brian Mulroney is a great example of somebody who, was the toast of the country until he was a pariah. You mentioned Gordon Campbell. He was all downhill from his first win. There's a few of them. Trudeau's one I look at, and I think that Horgan must look around and think, maybe it would be better to retire while I'm still popular.
Justin Trudeau at 31% he was reelected with. So I'm not sure that's.
Yeah, I mean I just mean when his base turns on him, and they will, because every base turns on every leader once they've been there for too long. Mm-hmm. That will get ugly.
Yeah, no, for sure. You're right. There's a bad record of. I think we've talked about this before. Neither of us can think of the last BC leader to actually leave without being pushed or knifed or in disgrace,
there defeated.
Isn't one. Or defeated.
There really isn't one at all.
Not that I can think of. If there is, it's before W.A.C. Bennett.
Yeah, which should tell you something. And so if Horgan could buck that trend, that actually would be historic.
Yes. Yeah, forget all this. Oh, I got to serve one day longer than Christy Clark. No, just leaving on your own terms will be like pretty. Yeah. That's the legacy that's missing from every other premier since pre-Bennett. And
is there something you want to talk about before I ask you about the sacred object you were holding aloft before the start of the show?
Just quickly on Ukraine. So President Zelensky presented to the House of Commons this morning. I thought the speech was powerful and inspiring and heartbreaking and awful and wonderful all at once. It's what they're facing is just unbelievable. At ICBA here, we have one of our member services staffers. She's got close family in Ukraine. We've watched her struggle with what's going on. We've watched her wait breathlessly for texts. We've been as helpful as we can to her and her family. ICBA's board of directors last week had a meeting, authorized $25,000 from the association to be donated to the Red Cross for Ukrainian relief efforts. Then the board looked around the table and said, you know what, let's match that just here at the table personally and put in another $25,000 around the table. Since then, the total now on our page is now up over $85,000. Wow. We're hoping to top out at 100. We'll have to do a little bit of a push to get there in the next week or two. Some of that is individual and will actually be matched further by the federal government. But look, if you're in a position where you can help the people of Ukraine, the Red Cross's relief efforts there, or one of the dozens of other charities on the ground doing the work there, please do. You're welcome to do it through ICBA. You can check my Twitter for those links, or wherever. Just, if you have the ability to give, please do, because this is a humanitarian crisis that no one expected, no one wanted, except for one man. And whatever we can do to help those folks. It's good. The construction, it's a good market right now in BC. There is money there's money to be generous, and people are being generous. There's also, as refugees come to Canada, there's jobs available in construction. We're connecting people as best we can. But right now, this is a humanitarian disaster on the ground, and so however we can help, please do.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Red Cross. I have heard, I think, 3 different interviews with Ukraine experts on the radio and in TV, completely different people, and all of them were asked the same question: how can I help? And they all said the exact same thing, which was actually the place your money will do the most good right now is the Red Cross. There are other places you can give to, and then there's nothing wrong with them, but in terms of actually helping people on the ground, that's probably your best bet. And so it's, I didn't know that you were doing that before we started taping. It's good to hear that that's going to the Red Cross. And hey, if you can be generous, please do, because none of us know, and hopefully never do, what that's like.
Yeah, what is Zelensky's lines? Was imagine bombs dropping on Vancouver, and you just pause for a second, right? Like, I can't imagine what those people are facing. They didn't want this. They didn't provoke this. They are the innocent victims on the ground here. Red Cross, like the Red Cross gets into places other agencies can't, simply because of their reputation, their standing, and their historic nature. They also make it very easy to fundraise. If you're an association or a company out there and you want to do something with your own members, you can go to redcross.ca. You can request your own portal with your own logo that you can send a link out to your people. That's what we did at ICBA. It's what the BC Home Road Builders did during the mudslide crisis in late 2021 in British Columbia. This is, sadly, the Red Cross is very good at this because they have to be. And I wish they didn't. I wish the world was a better place. But whatever you can do for the people of Ukraine, please find a way to help.
And there's no way to seg out of that other than to underscore once again. Please do, if you can. Every penny helps. There are helpless kids over there. I don't know if you guys have had conversations with your family. Having to talk about this with my son was a conversation I didn't want to have, and just the horror that there are kids there was hard to explain for him to get over. On a much happier note, and frankly a welcome distraction, if you are a fan of the show, you know that last week, Jordan was lording it over me because his beloved Green Bay Packers, of which, yes, I am contractually obligated to say that he is a very small part owner of.
A co-owner of the Green Bay Packers.
Yes, thank you. A shareholder is Aaron Rodgers, their quarterback, their MVP quarterback, elected to stay there instead of going to, as much rumored, to the Denver Broncos, which is my favorite team. As we were taping, and as Jordan was lording it over me, my team pulled off a bit of a stunner, trading for also star quarterback Russell Wilson. Most of you will know who he is because he played past tense for the Seattle Seahawks. Next year he'll be wearing one of those beautiful, magnificent blue helmets with the horse on it. And as it turns out, this is kind of amazing. One of the first major appearances that Russell Wilson will make post-trade is next month in Vancouver, where he's going to be sitting up on a stage with you, which is kind of amazing. Now, I mean, first of all, please do talk about the event and what you're allowed to ask, Mr. Wilson.
ICBA every year has a gala dinner where we celebrate construction. The past few years, actually we haven't had one for 2 years because of COVID, but the past few years before that, we've had a different legendary quarterback. There's something magical about quarterbacks, right? You watch them on TV, but we don't get the same kind of interactions in Canada with them as you do, say, a hockey player or. Yeah. There's just something, and there's something magical about the quarterback position, right? You're the leader of a team. You're the face of the franchise, and so much rides on your arm and your ability to process information, what's going on. Like, you are the key leader. So, we've had in recent years, we've had Peyton Manning, Hall of Famer, two-time Super Bowl champion, once with the Denver Broncos. We've had Brett Lorenzo Favre, my all-time favorite player. I'm looking at his jersey right now in my office. God, it's beautiful. Only won one championship, but could have had more. What a great guy. Amazing guy. That day is one of my favorite days ever. I'll say second to my wedding in case my wife is watching, but it's close.
Good save.
Close. My poor kids are like, what about me? What about the day I was born? Okay. And then just kidding, kids. I love you. Then the third one we had was Troy Aikman, three-time 1990 Super Bowl champion with the Dallas Cowboys. And so for this year, we moved it outside the usual window. We usually do it in the fall. And we thought, well, no, let's move it to the spring and see if we can actually get active quarterbacks. And we thought, what better active quarterback to get than the quarterback of the, this is Seahawks country, the Seattle Seahawks, Russell Wilson. Super Bowl champion, Walter Payton Man of the Year, a guy who he and his wife, the pop star Sierra, really early on in the vaccination campaign, made a video of them both getting vaccinated, which
oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Meant to reach out to African American communities that were a little bit skeptical of this, like really solid citizens. Like you could ask for better people, and a great quarterback. And then lo and behold, we hear the trade rumors that Russ might be traded, and we wait and we wait and we wait, and sure enough, we're on camera, and boom, the trade happens. And he's now a Denver Bronco. So the gala is celebrating construction, celebrating Russell Wilson's 10 seasons with the Seahawks. We expect a pretty warm welcome for him. I don't think anyone blames Russ for this trade. And yeah, I get to ask him all sorts of questions. And up till now, it's been like, the question I've been most like obsessing over is like, how do I ask him about that second Super Bowl when he threw the interception and he had a chance to like beat Brady, and it fell apart. Like, how do I ask that question? That question now feels a little bit quaint, but I'll still ask it. But now we'll have to ask about his new team and how that's going to go, and his favorite moments in Seattle, visiting Seattle Children's Hospital, the work he did there. There's a lot to ask him about, so it'll be interesting. But I'll give you a prediction, Maclean. You ready for this?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Russell Wilson. I'm going to say this to him. Russell Wilson will be the 2022 NFL MVP, receiving his first MVP votes ever, which is a travesty of Seattle's geographic location that he's never received an MVP vote.
Agreed.
He's going to go into the Bronco land. He'll turn around the team into, what were you, like 7-10 last year or something?
I believe so.
Yeah, he'll turn it into an 11 or 12 win team. He's not going to go deep in the playoffs. The Broncos are flawed still, but I believe he will be the MVP of the league next year.
Well, he's getting a dogfight in his own division, but yes, I'm excited. He's our best quarterback since, well, yes, you mentioned him, Peyton Manning. And it's kind of funny in that his one Super Bowl win came against the Denver Broncos and Peyton Manning. So, I mean, there's a lot of... They did, actually. I remember that keenly because I'm a lifelong Broncos fan. My dad's a lifelong Seahawks fan. When they were going to meet in the Super Bowl, I was away. I was out of town in Calgary for a wedding. But I booked a red-eye at like 1 a.m. or something, and arrived very bleary-eyed to sit with my dad to watch a Super Bowl that we both had waited our whole lives to watch, only for my team to be unmercifully crushed as I fought to keep my head upright. But yes, he was very happy, and so I'm happy for him. And I'm even happier for me now that we stole Russell Wilson.
I don't know what stole. You paid a lot for him, but it's he's a great quarterback. Like the thing about Russell Wilson is he makes things happen. He's never out of a game, no matter how far behind they are. He's got the best deep ball in football. I say as an Aaron Rodgers guy who's watched Rodgers connect on several Hail Marys. No one throws a deep ball like Russell Wilson, and I think he's going to energize that locker room, and it'll be interesting to see. You're right, tough division, especially quarterback-wise. Got Justin Herbert and some guy named Patrick Mahomes kind of cluttering it up for you. Poor Derek Carr. Like in most other divisions, he'd be competitive, but fourth by quite a distance.
Oh, they'd sing folk songs about Derek Carr if he played in the NFC East, but instead he's the worst quarterback in his division.
Yes. Yeah, so Russell Wilson will go there. Nathaniel Hackett, former offensive coordinator for the Packers, is the new head coach in Denver. He and Luke Getsy will know how to get the most out of Russ. And that's why I think MVP could be on the horizon here.
I like it. I like where your head's at, Jordan. I'd rather have a Super Bowl win, but I'll take that too.
Packerland, we have 7 MVPs from our 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks in the last 3 years, and only 2 Super Bowls. So, Titletown, we count MVPs. They're very important. In fact, we should have 9 MVPs. We should actually count Kurt Warner's 2 because he was a backup quarterback for Brett Favre, who the Packers had to cut because. We had a Hall of Fame quarterback. Imagine having 3 Hall of Fame quarterbacks on your roster in the past 30 years.
That is a wild leap of counting, but I'll give it to you because I'm feeling generous today. Now, there will be no hot stove next week. I'm sorry to say. I'm taking I'm going to call it a much deserved, but definitely a very necessary week off. But we'll be back the week after when the House will be back in session, I think, which will get us into just before April. I should look at a calendar. But anyway, no hot stove next week. In 2 weeks, we'll see you then. He's Jordan Bateman. I'm Maclean K. Happy politics.